Hello, class. I hope everybody's doing okay. We are going to finish up today with some Edgar Allan Poe poetry. I only have three select poems from Edgar Allan Poe that I have chosen. The first one is the Sonnet to Science. The second one is the Raven, which you may know. And the last one is another of his more popular poems called Annabel Lee. Again, reflecting on Poe and his whole dynamic. It is American Gothic. It is also romantic, a lot of it. He's in very much the same genre and the same general time period as the Romantic authors. So he's more of an American variation on that particular movement. And all of the things that apply to people like William Blake and Wordsworth and Coleridge, they apply to Poe as well. So without further ado, we will start with the Sonnet to Science, which I have really included as a way to show his continuity with the Romantic movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through it one time, and then we'll talk about, well, I'll read through it again a little bit more slowly, and we will talk about some of the more poignant images and things that we can discuss with this poem. And then we will move on to the Raven. So, Sonnet to Science by Edgar Allan Poe. Science, true daughter of old time thou art, who alterest all things with thy peering eyes. Why preyest thou upon thus, I'm sorry, why preyest thou thus upon the poet's heart, vulture, whose wings are dull realities? How should he love thee, or how deem thee wise, who wouldst not leave him in his wandering, to seek for treasure in the jeweled skies, albeit he soared with an undaunted wing? Hast thou not dragged Diana from her car, and driven the Hamadryad from the wood, to seek a shelter in some happier star? Hast thou not torn the Naiad from her flood, the elfin from her green grass, and from me the summer dream beneath the tamarind tree? Okay, so he starts out by addressing science. Science, the true daughter of old time thou art, who alterest all things with thy peering eyes. So he's addressing science as a personification, and he's accusing science of altering all things. If you'll recall, the Romantics were trying to reclaim spirituality in a lot of ways in the face of the sort of industrial and scientific revolutions. So he's basically saying, like, you're going in and you're changing all of this stuff, and that's not very nice of you, right? And then he says, why preyest thou upon the poet's heart, vulture, whose wings are dull realities? So he's basically asking, he's accusing science of like somehow impeding his creative process as a poet, specifically as it regards to his heart or his emotion. Science does have a tendency to kind of I got to be careful what I say here. It has a tendency to kind of make things sort of um, reduced to their elemental forms. You know, so when you talk about love as a poet, you're talking about all the crazy emotions and the transcendental feelings that you're going through. But when you talk about love as a scientist, you talk about a chemical reaction occurring in the brain, usually for the purpose of encouraging mating or social bonds that help survival. This is a very mundane way of describing the experience of love, and I think that's kind of what Poe is getting at. He's accusing science of preying upon his heart and being a vulture. You know, a vulture is a carrion bird. It's a nasty image. It's associated with death. So I think he's kind of calling out science and saying, you know, you're robbing me of some existential joy that you shouldn't be taking from me. Okay. Then he says, how should he love thee, or how deem thee wise, who wouldst not leave him in his wandering to seek for treasure in the jeweled skies, albeit he soared with an undaunted wing? So he basically describes the poet as like a wanderer. And these jeweled skies, we can think of the jeweled skies as like imagination or like the imaginative space. And the jewels that he recovers are the images, the beautiful sort of transcendent images and concepts that he derives from his imagination. And he's accusing science of prohibiting that, of preventing that process from being carried out appropriately. Then he asked, hast thou not dragged Diana from her car and driven the Hamadryad from the wood? These are mythological references. Excuse me. He's accusing science of sort of removing the myth from reality and from his life. He does mention, albeit he soared, going back just a little bit, a couple of lines before, he says, albeit he soared with an undaunted wing. I'm pretty sure that's an Icarus reference. Uh, of course, Icarus is guilty of some kind of transgression. Maybe the poet is guilty of a transgression in the eyes of the scientist, because the poet is still kind of playing with these old concepts like superstition and mythology and religion and all this stuff. And so he's kind of defending his actions. So yeah, I'm soaring with an undaunted wing, but look at the jewels that I'm bringing back. And then he says, to seek shelter in some happier star, hast thou not torn the naiad from her flood, the elfin from the green grass, and from me the summer dream beneath the tamarind tree? Basically accusing science of robbing life of its magic, of taking the myth and the joy out of everything. Now, some of you may be science majors or on a science track, and you may think very highly of science, and you may look at this on the part of Poe as being some just kind of like, he's sort of being a sourpuss about it. You know, he's not really accepting science for the beauty and the gift that it is, and he's kind of focusing on the fact that it's taking away his sense of peace and of the value of his imagination and stuff. But I do think there is a point to be made on Poe's part, which is that science does kind of, at least for some people, you got to remember that science is largely, it's kind of exclusive. Not really, but there are some people, like, I'll be honest with you, if you put me in charge of like mapping the human genome, we would not have gotten very far. My brain is not built for that. There are some people that are like creative intelligences or literary intelligences, or, you know, their brain is more adept at different things. And it's kind of a bummer that we sort of, in the wake of science, we kind of put all of those things on the back burner. We don't really care so much about art in school anymore. You know, it's really more about, you know, engineering and physics and math and all of that stuff. And that's fine for the people that really enjoy that. But then there's another type of person that kind of, it sort of robs them of a certain joy, I think. And that's what he's getting at. And this is very much in the vein of the Romantics, criticizing or responding to the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. Next, we have the Raven. Ooh, this is a fun one. So the Raven is really just, it's a work that has to do with the feelings of death and loss. It also invokes a lot of mythology and a lot of very interesting imagery, and it's written very with a very strong meter. So it's one of his better known poems, and I'll just read it to you. This one is a bit longer, so what I'll do is I'll read each stanza, and then I'll talk about the stanza. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Couple of elements you see off the start. You see the repetition. There's repetition. There's rhythm. You see he's talking about how he was in over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. He's basically reading books. He's in his study reading books, and he hears someone knocking on the door, and he's like, it's nothing. It's nothing. Distinctly, I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. So then he just basically tells you, yeah, I was reading in my study because I was trying to take my mind off of the loss of my young lover, whose name is Lenore, and I'm so upset about it, I'm not even going to speak her name anymore after this. So we're already getting into the quality of romanticism to express raw emotion. In this case, it is the emotion of grief. And it's a very heavy emotion, and I think he does a good job of kind of showing not only grief, but how people tend to try to deal with grief and like take their mind off it, how it always creeps in, and he does a good job of setting that up. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." So he starts to get like his mind kind of runs crazy. He's like, who is this knocking at my door? His heart starts beating and he's like, oh, no, it's just some visitor. No big deal. It's just the neighbor wanting a cup of sugar. He's trying to come up with an explanation because really on a subconscious level, he knows what this is, as we will see. Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. Sir, said I, or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. So he kind of builds up this suspense. Poe, always the master of suspense. Building up the suspense. What is it? What's behind the door? Who's knocking on the door? It's nothing. He takes it away. It's nothing. And so then you're like, well, what was this guy? Is he hallucinating? Is he imagining things? Is somebody messing with him? Like, is this a murder mystery? What's this going to be? Okay. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore, merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. So sorry, I skipped over the explanation. He basically stood there looking in the darkness, and he's like, he starts to think, is this my dead wife? Like, is this the ghost of my dead wife? So he asks the word Lenore, but only the echo comes back, and he's like, all right, so it's nothing. So then he goes back into the chamber, back into my chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. So now he goes over and he opens the window, and in comes the stately raven of the saintly days of yore. The raven being, of course, I don't know if we have ravens in Georgia. Maybe we do. I know crows are very common, and they're similar. The raven is a carrion bird. It's a black bird. It has a lot of mythological associations, believe it or not. One of the mythological associations it has is with the Norse god Odin, although I doubt that's what Poe meant here. But there are a lot of superstitious elements. Also, ravens, as I said, a carrion bird like the vulture, which means they eat dead stuff. So generally speaking, the raven is considered a harbinger of death, which in this case, we know he was just asking about his dead wife. In comes the raven. And that's not an accident. And look at the behavior of the raven. The raven, it says, with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door. The bird literally walks in like it owns the place. Literally, like, this is my house, and like just sits on he says the bust of Pallas. It's like a little statue that sits above his door. Okay, then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Okay, so the raven keeps saying nevermore, nevermore. And it's like, why is the raven saying this? And he demands, he's like, all right, tell me your name. What's your name, bird? And the raven just says nevermore. And it's like, that's very strange. Why is the bird saying nevermore over and over again? Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. He's like, well, the bird can't be named Nevermore. That doesn't make any sense. And of course, he's doing all kinds of cool things with rhyme here, right? He's, kind of trying to write it off like, well, your name's not Nevermore, you silly bird. What do you really mean? Well, we'll see. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther then he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. So he's like, he'll go away in a minute. And the raven's like, I'm not going anywhere. And this starts to bother him. Now he's getting a little shaken, a little shooken up, as you would if a bird broke into your house and started saying things to you. You'd probably think there was something off. Started at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken. Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. So then he's like, all right, here's what happened. This bird had another owner, and the owner, he had a lot of bad luck. And so he just sat around saying nevermore, nevermore, because he was depressed. And so that's why this bird keeps saying, he's still trying to find reasons. Of course, we know because of the correlation between his mourning and the arrival of the bird, that the bird is a symbol of his grief. And the grief will not leave him. As much as he tries to convince himself that it isn't a problem and that it's something else and that it's going to go away, it keeps coming back and it keeps saying, nevermore, nevermore, nevermore. I will never leave you. I will stay over you all the time. And that's the revelation that he's kind of trying to ignore. He's trying to push that off and not doing a very good job. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore. So now he's like really getting into it. What does this bird mean? What does he mean? What could he possibly be talking about? And it's kind of like screaming at you, the reader. You're like, dude, this is your grief. Like, why are you so thick? But it's like he doesn't want to accept it. He doesn't want to acknowledge that this is in fact what this is about. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloated o'er. She shall pass, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed by an unseen censer, swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore, quoth the raven, nevermore. So then he just blatantly accuses the bird. He calls him a wretch. Also, seraphim, when I usually have my seated class, I ask what a seraphim is. Very few people know. It's a class of angel. And if you look up biblically accurate angel, you're going to find some pictures that are very different from what you've seen in Renaissance artwork and other such things. Angels are very strange, but they kind of humanize them so that they don't scare the children, I guess. But he accuses the raven of lying of taunting him, and he's basically asking the raven to let him forget his wife. He's like, if you've been sent by God to help me or whatever, then let me forget this. And the raven's like, nope, nevermore. So then he says, prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil. So now notice how the status of the bird keeps being elevated. First it's kingly and stately, and now then it's a wretch, and then but it's sent by God, and now it's a prophet. Now it is the messenger of God himself, right? Whether tempter sent, of course, that's the devil. It could be sent by the devil. We don't know. Or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore. That's like a storm. Maybe the storm blew the bird in. Desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore. Is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Asking, is there balm in Gilead? I kind of space on the, let me, the balm of Gilead was a medicinal perfume. It is a universal cure it's a figure of speech for it's like a panacea, like a thing that cures everything. So he's asking, is there a cure for this grief? And the raven says no. And then he says, prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by the God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. So he asks the raven directly, will I see my wife again? She is dead. Will I see her again? And the raven says, no. Now, in this case, the raven is acting like the sort of he's acting like science in a way. He's basically saying like, no, there's no afterlife. This is all there is, and you're never going to see your wife again, and tough. And that's like too much for him. He snaps. He goes, be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of the lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. He's like, get out of here, bird. Quoth the raven, nevermore. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house. And the raven never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws its shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Okay, a lot of cool things going on. Things that are romantic, use of the mythological, use of religious imagery, a mixing of religious imagery with the mundane or the normal world, the use of repetition to create a certain mood and create a certain pattern, the sort of use of the symbol of this bird for the powerful emotion of his grief. And it is beautifully written. I mean, even if you don't get it, it is a beautifully written poem, and I love reading it. I just remembered that, having read it for you. So now we will finish with Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. This one is just sad. I don't really have anything, there's not a whole lot of analytical stuff I can say other than this is a sad poem. We know Poe lost his young wife, so like the Lenore and the Raven, Annabel Lee is a young woman who he was in love with, who died. We believe that she is supposed to represent his wife. And this grief is a very real thing for Poe, and so the emotion translates. It's very powerful. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. So he sets off the tone with like, there was a beautiful kingdom by the sea, and there was a young maiden, and she was in love with me, and it was great. I was a child, and she was a child, in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged Saros of heaven coveted her and me. So he says the love is so strong that the angels were jealous of it. So he sets up this love as like this transcendent ideal, this like ultimate thing that was so beautiful and so powerful that the angels were jealous. All right. And this was the reason that long ago, in the kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her highborn kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in the kingdom by the sea. So a sepulchre is like an above-ground tomb. If you've ever been to the city of New Orleans, most people in New Orleans are buried in sepulchres instead of like regular coffins, because you don't want your dead grandparents to go floating down the street. I mean, let's just be real, right? And a lot of times when places where it floods or where there's a lot of problems with erosion, things like that, if you inter the body, even within a casket in the ground, it can actually be raised by a lot of rain or certain weather conditions. So some people choose to build a concrete or stone tomb in this case to sort of inter the body. This is a common method of burial. The angels, not so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. So he blames the angels. He's like, because they were jealous, they took her away from me. And they sent this this cloud that causes a chilling, which we can assume is disease. Poe's wife died of tuberculosis. So did his mother. So did his stepmother. So this guy is ravaged by not only disease, but by one specific disease, which is TB. Okay. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. So he says, even though she's dead, this is such a powerful connection. It's a transcendent connection. The angels and the demons have no power of it. No one can sever my soul from my departed wife. It's very, very sad. And then this is the part that is the big sappy stuff, for lack of a better term. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lay down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. So we have this very sad image of a gentleman weeping over the grave of his departed loved one, and it's very, very, very sad. So I hope I've made you all sufficiently sad today. You're welcome. If you were happy, sorry. It's a beautiful poem, but it evokes very powerful emotions. So hopefully you got something out of that. So that is the poetry of Edgar Allan Poe. Fits into many of the same themes that we've been talking about. Kind of goes a little on the darker side, but that's Poe for you. What did you expect? And that will conclude this particular lesson. So have an excellent week, and I will talk to you again soon.